The French Revolution began for many of the same reasons the American and English revolutions began: high taxes, limited say in government, belief in Enlightenment ideals. But as we talked about yesterday, things quickly took a turn for the worse. Today we're going to talk about Don't Lose Your Head, how the French Revolution gets a little out of hand. Well, at first things started fairly simply. They wrote a new constitutional monarchy in 1791. A constitutional monarchy is a government where a monarch has specific laws. It's a definite form of limited government, which was kind of the idea behind the Enlightenment. It weakened the power of the king severely. No longer would France have an absolute monarch. And it gave the people the power to elect a new legislative body. Please note, they're electing a legislative body. There's going to be more than just 3 votes like in the Estates General. And the people have a say in who's going to be in it. It's going to be very different from the old system, and everybody thought this was going to solve the problems. Unfortunately, the problems are just about to begin. Sadly, the revolution began becoming more and more radical. Now, the word radical is one of those words that kind of changes meanings from time to time. And in theory, the idea of radical government's not necessarily a bad idea, possibly. But more often than not, when we're talking about a radical government, it does end up being a bad idea. What it means is they're really, really, really fierce about something. Within a few months, the new government stopped using the Constitution altogether. They had written a Constitution to save France from an absolute government, and they ended up getting a totally new type of absolute government. The radical government arrested the king, and the new legislator take over the country, and they become known as the Convention. It becomes basically a dictatorship of a small group of people, of a small legislature. The idea had been to save them from a dictatorship of an absolute monarch, and they just replaced one dictator with a group of dictators. At about this point, the new government decided to institute a second round of changes. Now, these changes also sound pretty good. They became a republic, which is a government ruled by elected officials, and that's a good idea. And they instituted what's called universal male suffrage. Now, in 5th grade, you may have talked about the idea of women's suffrage and the women's suffrage movement. The word suffrage means the right to vote. So when France became a country with universal male suffrage, it meant that all men now had the right to vote. It didn't matter what color you were. It didn't matter how much money you had. And a lot of countries that allowed people the right to vote, you only got the right to vote if you were a wealthy person, if you were a wealthy landowner. So France was allowing all the people that were men to vote. And this is a great idea. It's a step towards more freedoms for everybody. The new government also instituted a draft because they were afraid other countries might come and attack them. So they needed an army to fight back. Now, sadly, for the moment we've all been waiting for. To keep the people in line, France began using something called the guillotine. Now, let me tell you, the guillotine was not a completely new idea. There had been devices similar in the time leading up to this moment. But a doctor named Guillotine comes along in France and says, you know what, this will be a humane way of putting people to death. And the idea caught on, and it becomes known after the doctor. What it was a large device in which you put somebody head first in the device, and you pull a rope, and a blade drops down, and it chops their heads off. Enemies of the Republic, which were any criminals who they thought might restore things the old ways. Any rich guy who might show up, who might try to restore the old French-style government. Any friends of the king who might restore the old-style government were put to death by the guillotine. It was considered a quick death. It was considered a humane death, a nice death, as opposed to the old idea of the guy with the axe whacking and whacking and whacking. And people loved watching this happen. Watching people be put to death by guillotine became a very popular form of entertainment in France during this time period. The most radical, the most different, basically the wildest group of guys in France during this time period were a group called the Jacobins. And the Jacobins were led by this guy named Maximilien Robespierre. And Robespierre wants France to change completely. His goal is to completely wipe out the king and everything about the king. If there was anything the king liked, Robespierre hated it. He quickly became a dictator and establishes what's become known as the Reign of Terror. In the Reign of Terror, anybody remotely suspected of being a friend of the king or a rich guy or allied with the old-style France was put to death by the guillotine. And it becomes an even bigger idea. And they're killing people left and right in France under the Reign of Terror. The word reign means the king or the leadership, and then so the Reign of Terror is the leadership of terror. A lot of people were scared because you never knew if you were the next guy they were going to decide to execute. Thousands of people were put to death in the Reign of Terror as threats to the French Republic. The exact number of people put to death is not known. Historians judge it between 25,000 people on the low end and upwards of 40,000 on the high end of people were put to death during the Reign of Terror. Now, I've got to tell you, 25,000 is a little bit less than Chester County has in it. That would be like if everybody in our county was put to death. It would be just a little bit more than the low end. And 40,000 is more than our county, plus about 7,000 or 8,000 people. So a lot of people are put to death during this time period as being potential threats to the new republic. King Louis and his bride, Queen Marie Antoinette, were put to death during the Reign of Terror. Marie Antoinette specifically, her last words were supposedly, "Let them eat cake." According to the story, in her trial, they were fussing about the fact that the people had no bread to eat. And Marie Antoinette was so clueless that she said, well, if they have no bread, let them eat some cake. Very few historians really believe this to be her last words, but it's just kind of gone down in history as how clueless she was, like in the video we watched on Thursday. What goes around comes around. A very wise man once said, if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Somebody else once said, violence begets violence. Robespierre, the man who spearheaded the Reign of Terror, headed up this idea that the guillotine would be the final solution to all of France's problems. In 1794 was found to be an enemy of the state. And the National Convention, the governing body of the French Republic, decided Robespierre was such a danger that he also had to be put to death by the guillotine. The guy who scared France to death was put to death for being an enemy of the state. So, for those of you who don't know, I like to consider this the definition of irony. It would be almost as bad as if a Pepsi truck was delivering a Coca-Cola machine. I would be horribly, horribly offended, for those of you who don't realize that. And the question becomes, now what? Robespierre's dead, the French Republic is in chaos, and the French are wondering what's going to happen now.